Welcome. Welcome to our March Ask the Staff. I'm Laura Steiner, and I'll be your host for this evening as we talk about how to host a recording event or site. Um, I I'm just going to skip over that because it's weird that I'm here. I am the Director of Outreach and Engagement Strategy for United Through Reading. I've been with United Through Reading for for a little over 3 years. And as a part of my role, I oversee our story stations here, there, and everywhere to serve our military community. As you know, our mission is to strengthen military family literacy, emotional bonds, and well-being through the power of reading together. And a big way that we do this is with our recording opportunities. So if you don't know, we do have kind of a trilogy of programmatic offerings. We do book distributions to military children around the world. Our goal is to put new books into the hands of every military child. We distribute literacy resources to provide very, powerful and effective um, opportunities for parents to increase their engagement with their children through literacy. And then, of course, we have our story time recordings. And these provide an opportunity for children to continue that connection with their parents, especially their service member parent, through on-demand video recordings. So why is shared story time on demand important? I think we're all here because we know it's important. Um, but just to give it some life, the on-demand recordings allow children to share that read aloud with their service member parent, no matter the time of day, no matter where their service member parent is, and it makes it highly accessible for them. I think that looks different for different families. I can tell you from personal experience, it has had a very profound effect on our family. Our first storytime recording came when my oldest, who is now almost 15, was a little baby. My husband was deployed nearly her entire first year of life and sent us a DVD with a recording of him reading on it. And we watched it all day, every day for, 6 months. And it was amazing. And when he came off the ship and saw her, and she had, of course, doubled in size and was a whole person and not just a little blob. Um, she knew who he was. She knew that he was daddy. And it's something that we still use today. And it looks a little different. The kids can all read on their own and read independently, but it's really about that connection. My husband, for example, is TDY right now and he's gone for about a month. And a couple times a week, we'll get those alerts that we have new stories from him. And it's a great way at the end of the day after school and sports and sibling brawls. It's a great way to just sort of settle down and reconnect as a family and for everyone to feel that he's still very much a part of the day to day. And it's how we like to end our days is by choosing a recording from dad. So it provides that connection and everyone can maintain it, even the teenagers. I would say, especially the teenagers, after a particularly tough day. That's kind of how they like to sort of um, level set and, recover from whatever has happened in their day. So, in my mind, I'm hearing, so you want to build a snowman, but so you want to have a story station. There are a lot of different options for story stations today. We've come a long way since 1989 and from VHS and DVDs, and we have a lot of different options now. So there are a couple different things that we consider in deciding what kind of story station makes sense. And our goal is always to, when a story station is requested, get it to yes. It's really just a matter of figuring out the best way to meet the needs of that particular community. So the first thing we look at is demand signal. Is there demand signal in the location the story station will be? And what is that demand tempo? So are there people who want to do recordings? Are there people who should want to do recordings, service member parents, or service members who have strong connections with children in their lives that want to make those recordings? And what is that tempo? Is this a place where service members are constantly deployed or constantly TDY, or just working, crazy hours all the time? Is this a place where that happens, but maybe it happens once every 6 months? Or maybe it's a total anomaly. Maybe this is a unicorn of a location where everyone's home by 5 most of the time, but we have something coming up. And so we want to make sure we're meeting the needs of those service members. So what that tempo looks like and the volume of that demand signal help us to decide what the best type of story station would be for that particular location. And then we look at the access to resources. Some of our story station modalities require Wi-Fi. So is that an option? Not all places can have a camera. And so that's something that we need to discuss. Can a camera be placed in the place where the service members are? Um, and if not, that's okay. We have other options. And then is mail available? So some of our story stations are in places that don't have Wi-Fi, but they do have mail. So we can mail home those video recordings. Some have very limited access to both. And that's where we get to roll up our sleeves and get super creative in figuring out how to create access to on-demand recordings for those children when their parents don't always have access to, communication with the rest of the world. And then the next is leadership support. When we are creating a story station, whether it be a one-time event or a self-service station or an embedded station, it's really important to have support throughout the ranks that will be affected, because top-down support definitely is a big indicator of success. And then lastly, volunteer commitment. We respect that our volunteers are volunteers. And so different levels of story station require different time commitments. And we want to ensure that we are putting something in place that is sustainable for everyone involved, especially our volunteers. So as I alluded to, we have 3 kind of key story station options. And like I said, we get creative in how these are executed. So sometimes there is a hybrid of these, and our goal is to create access to storytime recordings, no matter the situation. And so we look at what is going to work best. So first, we have our pop-up recording events, and these are sort of one and done. These, when we do a pop-up event, these are typically staff or volunteer driven, and it is exactly what it looks like. So maybe there is a unit that is preparing to deploy or preparing to go out and be engrossed in an exercise for several weeks, or just has a really aggressive day-to-day tempo. And they would like to have a one-time event where people can sign up or walk in and make those recordings and have those ready for their children. In these situations, we can help you. The next level would be a self-service story station. So this is where we provide resources and materials for a volunteer to host story stations kind of as they're needed. And it's done in a way where they are enabling service members and educating service members to download the United Through Reading app and make recordings on their own. And they can make them sometimes at that story station, but really we're providing the resource and the information for self-service. So they can take it home and do it, whenever makes sense for them. And then the kind of deepest level we have are our embedded and location story stations. So these are kind of the more traditional one that I think a lot of people think of, and it's where we were rooted in our in United Through Reading. And these are story stations where we are providing books and equipment to a specific place or unit that has regular demand, or has demand for a 6 to 12 month period or more, for service members to make those recordings. Okay, pop-up recording events. So as I said, these are fantastic to do when you want to really have kind of a target, when you have a target audience and you want to ensure that everyone has a recording before that demand arises. Maybe it's a deployment, maybe it's something else happening, maybe it's just for fun, but you have a very specific day or set of days in mind. For these, what we provide are a kit of books. So we'll provide, depending on what the size, what the volume is anticipated to be, we send a whole variety of books that will meet the needs of that particular unit or group or organization. And we provide a tripod that can be used to make recordings at the event. And sometimes what we'll do is provide you with what is called facilitator access. So our volunteer can essentially use their personal device as a story station, and they can make recordings for other people without it impacting their own account. They show up in their accounts. It's truly fantastic. And beyond my technological capabilities in designing it, but it's a fantastic way to kind of jump in and host a recording event. And then the benefits of this are our service members get to make those recordings, and our volunteers can accrue volunteer hours, and everyone walks away with that on-demand recording experience and that deeper connection through literacy. So the next level would be a self-service recording station. So this is when you have a steady flow of service members that may be interested in making those recordings. So it's not kind of one and done. It's pretty constant. And in this situation, it doesn't need to be every day. It doesn't need to be at a set schedule. It can be when needed, but it's really about making the resources and materials available to service members when they kind of walk in and ask for them. So for this, similarly, we provide a tripod and we provide the books, and then we also provide additional training in how to market this story station. And the responsibilities of the coordinator are a little bit more enhanced. So they'll touch base with me about once a quarter to let me know what sort of events they've been hosting or what their rate is of service members taking advantage of the program. And we assist, with the event organization. If they're doing events, we can help with that. We can send books to help market the program. And it's really fantastic. So this is very beneficial when you want to have a story station. You don't necessarily need a whole bunch of equipment because everyone who comes in typically has their phone with them and can make that recording on their own. Or perhaps you have a lot of service members that are interested in doing it and want to, take a book, go home and make a recording. And that's just fine. And that's kind of how the self-service story station works. It's sort of mid-level in terms of the amount of touch that it has, but the impact is the same. And then lastly, we have our embedded and location story stations. So these have the highest level of demand and intensity for the volunteers involved. These are good when you have either a location that has a high volume of service members in need or desiring to make recordings. For example, we have some of these at MWR libraries, at some of our forward deployed installations, where service members who are stationed there or service members who are going through TDY can pop into that story station and either walk in or schedule a time to make a recording. We also place these in military units when requested, so they can take it with them on their deployment or house it with them at their command site, for service members to take advantage of. For these story stations, in addition to books and a tripod and support, we also provide recording equipment. And this is where access to technology comes into play. If we are putting an embedded story station somewhere that has Wi-Fi, consistently has Wi-Fi, we will provide a tablet. And then it'll be sort of like doing it on your phone in facilitator mode, but without having to use the personal device. A lot of military commands, especially in the Navy and the Coast Guard, don't have Wi-Fi when they deploy, or if they do, consistent is not a word that would be used to describe it. So for these units, we also provide a camcorder and SD cards. And that allows the service member to make the recording. And then instead of it being emailed to the family, they mail it to the family. So it's a little bit more analog, but it is not reliant as much on technology that they may not always have access to. For these story stations, the coordinator responsibilities are a little bit more enhanced. They will touch base with me monthly, and so they will provide a report of their volume of service members making recordings, how many recordings they've made, and all of those different touch points. And we provide pretty extensive training for that, and then support throughout that entire life cycle of the story station. And the benefits, similarly to other modalities, the benefits are, of course, that connection to the family. It's a great opportunity when we embed a story station for volunteers to do something outside of their day-to-day job. It's a great way for service members who are maybe struggling a little bit during a deployment, or to connect with their colleagues, to have a higher sense of purpose in what they're doing, and to get those handy volunteer hours. And so the embedded story stations are kind of just a deeper, broader reach, for those situations. Okay, so the volunteer experience. Regardless of the type of story station, we do provide training for our volunteers to help ensure and enable their success. And then once they are engaging in the story station, they will have the opportunity to really get involved with those service members and their families. They can help market the program far and wide, attend briefs or other resource fairs to market the program to all involved. They can help at the recording event. They can help service members choose the stories and give them some coaching on the read aloud experience. I think sometimes it's not so obvious how to do a read aloud when the children aren't actually there. And it can feel a little bit off. I know it's even hard for me sometimes. Um, but the volunteers are really there to provide that support and that coaching when needed. So, if you are interested in hosting a story station, the first step would be to contact us, and then we'll work with you to determine the needs, in your location and what the best approach would be. Questions?
I do not see any questions, but I thought of some while you were presenting, if you wouldn't mind fielding some of mine.
I would be thrilled to field some of yours, Tanya.
So, um, looking at the differences in the story stations that are available and the volunteers, I know one you said you were talking about quarterly versus the embedded story station. For something like the embedded story station, what would a volunteer's time commitment look like each month that they would donate to that story station?
That's a fantastic question. Um, in general, my guidance is they should plan on spending about 5 hours a month. It can grow and increase from that substantially, but it is very much choose your own adventure. Some volunteers in larger commands are able to recruit others, whether it be friends or others that are voluntold, to help them execute the story station. In general, their time commitment will include a little bit of administrivia, so marketing the program, communicating with me, and being present for recordings, not in the room, but present to facilitate them happening. When a recording is made, that typically has a value of 30 minutes of volunteer time. So a volunteer at an embedded or location station may choose to have, a set time weekly that they are available to help make recordings, say 4 hours every Friday from noon to 4. Um, that's obviously 4 hours of their time. But if they're in a situation where life in their deployed unit has become a little bit more arduous, and the mission of the day is a little bit more aggressive, we completely understand that. And maybe that's a week they're not doing recordings. So it really is up to them to determine how much they are going to make it available. But in general, we provide 5 hours of volunteer time for administrivia. I don't think it takes that much time. I think it's probably a little bit less than that, depending on how deeply they are involved in it. And then it costs them about 30 minutes of time for each recording that they facilitate. Does that answer your question?
It certainly does. Thank you.
Yeah. And that's where I think it's important, the volunteer, how much they can commit. I think all of our volunteers are equally committed to the cause of making recordings, but they all have different demands. They have different demands in the workplace. They have different demands at home, and that greatly impacts how much their time commitment can be. And so as I was saying to a child this morning, just because we can doesn't mean we should. So even if an embedded or location story station makes sense, if the volunteers really can't commit to the follow through on it, a self-service story station might make more sense. That requires considerably less time from the volunteer because they're really more providing education and information, but they don't need to be as present for the making of recordings. And my expectations are significantly lower in terms of their contact back with me.
I'll ask one more question and then I'll let everybody else open it up or we'll dismiss. You had mentioned all story stations receive books. How do you determine how many books they get and the frequency at which they receive them?
That's a great question too. It's almost like you know us. It's based on a couple different factors, and we have it down to a pretty good science at this point. So the number of books they receive is based on three key factors. The first is the size of their target audience. If we're placing a story station at aboard a Coast Guard ship, for example, that has 100 service members aboard, statistically, the number that will be parents and the number that will make recordings is going to be much lower than if we place a recording station on an aircraft carrier that has 5,000 people aboard, or in an Army battalion that has, 5,000, 10,000 people deploying with it. And so we base it first on the volume of service members. If the books are for a specific audience, and this happens more often with a pop-up recording event, I will ask approximately how many children do you have? Do you think you'll have attending, or service member parents? Do you think you'll have attending? And what are their ages? So if it's going to an event for parents of preschoolers, we're going to target it that way. And that helps us to get that information. In terms of getting, I think you asked, getting more books, it's based on usage. So I track very closely the utilization of that story station, or their burn rate, if you will, and then replenish them as needed. So if a story station is doing 100 recordings a month, I will ensure that they have more books as they need them. And we will front load for our embedded story stations. We front load them based on their anticipated utilization so that they're not waiting for more. And then the third, which brings me to the third criteria, and that is, how easy is it to get more books to the story station? If the story station is at a library, for example, we provide maybe 15 to 20 books at the onset and one copy of each, because we know we can get them more books pretty quickly if they need it. We also know they can use the library books, and then request a copy of the book later from UTR. It's not as essential that they have a full library. For our embedded and location story stations, if they are at a time and a place where mail is infrequent or takes weeks on end to reach them, we will front load them with ideally about 75% of the books that they need to get through that season, if you will, that deployment or that wave of recordings. Did that answer it for you?
It certainly does. Thank you. I could ask more
Yeah.
questions, but I figured I'd let others go, or we could end early. I can come up with questions.
Yes, I do. Um, I had a question for myself and I forgot what it was. That I think the key takeaway, and I say this probably too much, but repeatedly when I'm training a new story station, again, whether it be a pop-up event, an embed in a deployed ship, or something in between, those two extremes, is our objective is to meet you where you are. So there's no at this point, we've been doing this for what, 36 years. I've been doing it for three, which is a drop in the bucket comparatively, but we've been doing this long enough that we have a general feel for what a story station needs in that moment. But the goal is always to get it to yes. If we have one story station that came and said, we don't really have Wi-Fi, we also don't really have mail. And so, I've been working with them for a year to figure out how they can make recordings and get them home to their children without really any way of doing it. And we're getting there, but it was not a hard no. It was a let's problem solve this and get it to yes. And most story stations are much simpler. It's a much more linear path. Um, but we're here to help create access to books, to read aloud experience with a parent, and there's really nothing we can't do. We're here to solve that conundrum of how does a service member read to their children when they are not in the same room? And we're always looking and working on creative ways to create that access.
I actually thought of one follow-up question and then I'll really be done. When you have a volunteer who's been running a recording site, however, whatever option they choose, when it is time for them to PCS, what does that process look like?
Oh, that is a great question. They're all great questions. That's a really good one. So it depends, like everything else. Typically, my first question will be, is there someone you can turn over this story station to? So if it's, regardless of where it is, we'll want to know, can this be continued in this location? Does the demand still exist, or did the demand leave with you? Or will the demand leave with you? And assuming it will still exist, we will ask, have you identified someone who might be interested in taking this over for you? If the answer is yes, then what we'll do is request a warm handoff for to that next volunteer that they can pass the torch to, and we will essentially retrain the story station. So we'll retrain that new volunteer. If they can't, then we will discuss which makes more sense, closing the story station or taking it with them. And those are very, situational. It completely depends on the volunteer and the situation of where they're going and where that story station is coming from and if it can be transferred. And there are a lot of, little minutia indicators on that. Um, Anytime we have turnover with a story station, with the facilitator, whether it's closing, moving, or being handed off to a new volunteer, we have a very basic a closeout form. And so we do an inventory of the books and the equipment. So we know what is on hand for the person taking it over, what is moving to a new story station with the volunteer, or what is coming back to United Through Reading. And then we take it from there in making our determinations. Any other questions? And do you have any follow-ups from that one, Tanya?
I do not. I was actually going to ask exactly what you just did. Did anyone have anything else to add? And if not, I would let you wrap it up.
Excellent. Well, I'm still singing. Do you want to start a story station? I won't scare everyone with my really bad singing voice. But if you are interested in hosting a story station, whether that be a one-time event, a self-service information station, or a full throttle embedded or location story station, do reach out to United Through Reading, because we are here to help. And there's no wrong request to getting a story station. As I said, we're here to meet you where you are, get it to yes, and ensure all service members have access to our recording opportunities when they need them. Thank you.